Welcome back to our walk through Romans. We are working our way through Romans, actually the third chapter. Today we're going to go up to verse number 19. Let me just say this. If you haven't been listening to the prior podcasts, go back and listen to them. And let me just say this also. At the end of this video, you're going to see our web address. If you are feeling led by the Holy Spirit to join in partnership with us, go to our website, hit the give button, and give as the Holy Spirit leads you to give. We can use your partnership in prayer, your partnership in giving. We need you to stand with us and us to stand with you. So will you do that for us? Today we're in Romans, the third chapter, verse number 19. And this is what the Apostle Paul is saying. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be closed and all the world may become accountable to God. Verse number 20, because by the works of the law no flesh will be justified in his sight. For through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Now, we've been talking this week about the Apostle Paul and how he's been using Jewish scriptures to prove to the Jewish people in Rome their need for Jesus. I hope that you've been watching, because you know what? We all need to have a refresher. Even believers need to have a refresher in understanding our nature before Christ. Everybody needs to understand that in themselves they can never be right before God. And so Paul has just finished calling the Jewish people a bunch of things that weren't nice. But why was he doing it? Because he hated the Jewish people? No. Because he wanted the Jewish people to realize their need for Jesus. We as believers need to be telling people and showing people their need for Jesus. You know, we need to give our testimonies. And our testimonies need to include our time before Christ. And then also include what Jesus has done in our lives since we surrendered ourselves to him. Now, verse number 19 says, now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be closed. What's Paul talking about? How many of you know that out of your mouth comes all kinds of excuses? Well, I was tired. Well, I was that, and I was this, and I was tempted, and I was, you know what? The Apostle Paul says that the law closes our mouth. It leaves every one of us without an excuse when it comes to sin. There are no excuses. There are no excuses when your mouth is full of bitterness, like he talks about in the verses prior to this. When your mouth is full of destruction, when you're constantly looking to kill someone, to shed innocent blood. We need to understand that the Apostle Paul is getting us to the point where we realize that we have no excuses. But then the Apostle Paul continues and says, all the world may become accountable to God. Now notice here that Paul says all the world. The Greek word here for world is the Greek word cosmos. It means the whole system, everybody who's in the world. Everybody in the world, both Jews and Gentiles, are going to have to stand before God, and they're going to be accountable for what they've done. We need to understand that. There is no one who has ever breathed air that's going to escape this experience of standing before God and giving an account to him for what they've done. Now, we as believers, we're going to give an account, but our account is going to be different. Our account's going to be, is your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life? For an unbeliever, you're going to have to give an account for every sin that you've committed, and you're going to do it before God. We will give an account. So the Apostle Paul is getting us to understand our need for Jesus. Verse number 20. Because by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. You know, we might try to justify ourselves. People do it all the time. We try to justify why we've done some of the things we've done. Oh, I had a need for that. You know, I remember someone was caught stealing, and the police asked them, why did you do that? Oh, I wanted it. Well, you know what they were doing? They were trying to justify themselves. But you know what? Our problem is that we need to justify ourselves in the sight of God, and we can't do it. You see, the law shows us that we need Jesus. The law shows us our sin. You know, people say, oh, I don't believe in the law. And people are saying, I don't believe that we should be teaching the law. I don't believe we should be putting the 10 Commandments in school. I don't believe we should be telling people this is right and this is wrong. We shouldn't be telling people this is sin. Well, you know what? They're going to be held accountable for the law, whether they knew the law or not. Paul said that in verse number 20, that all the world might become accountable to God. The whole world is going to be accountable. Going back to verse number 20. Because by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. And then the end of the verse. For through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Why do we need the law? Why do we need to tell people about the 10 Commandments? Because people need to know what they are going to be held accountable for. They need to know that someday they're going to stand before God, and God's going to say, now, how did you do? Now, I'm not talking about Christians, because your account's already been settled. You've been redeemed. Your sin has been paid for. But for an unbeliever, they are going to stand before God, and God's going to say, what about this sin? What about this law that I gave? What about that law? Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt obey your father and your mother. What about those things? How did you do? And that's why we need the law. We need the reading of the law into the hearts of people so that they know that they are in sin and so that they know they need Jesus. Thank you for watching this week. Join us again next week as we continue our walk through Romans.